Qat Wanders, welcome to the Story Engine podcast.
Hello, hello.
So we've got a lot to talk about. We're talking about books today, and we've got so many different things that I'm really excited to explore with you because you are brilliant in this area. But I want to introduce you properly, and that involves having you share a story about a defining moment in your life that has really made you who you are and how you show up in the world today.
That's easy for me with that defining moment. So when I was 7 years old, I had just written my first ever book series. And I mean, I wrote it like with a colored pencil and I illustrated it and I made it into a box set, 6 books in a tissue box. And I brought it to my dad and said, "Daddy, look, I'm an author." And he said, "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you." And he gave me $20 and he assured me he would always be my first customer and my number one fan. So when I was a rich and famous author, he'd always be there for me to buy the first copy of my book. And, fast forward 30 years and and I became a published author and he was there to buy the first copy of my book. And that copy of that first book sat next to him on his bed 1 week later while he took his last breath. And I was holding his hand when he did that. So that was a really pivotal moment in my life, was getting published before he died. He had 3 months left to live, he found out, and he told me that. So it really lit a fire up under my butt to get the book published. Honestly, if he hadn't gotten that diagnosis, I might never have done it. So that was what really got me going, was making my daddy proud. That was my why from the beginning. And to this day, with all these books I've published, I still think about him when I do it because we loved books. That was our thing.
I have no doubt he would be even more proud of you, seeing all of the really cool accomplishments, all of the books that you've worked on. Give us a picture of your life right now. How you're involved with books in so many different ways. Tell us how you help people.
Wow, this is a big.
It's a big one for you because you're so talented. You've got a lot of different things going on.
I have my hand in a few pots here. So probably my biggest passion is editing, which is ironic. I really love editing. I love writing too, but editing is probably where I shine the most. I went to school for it. I trained. I have a lot of experience. I started in traditional publishing. So I really got into the editing process, and helping self-published authors put out traditional publishing quality is kind of my goal. So I have my editing team I work with, and I own an editing company, and we all came from traditional publishing. We all have master's degrees. It's a very elite group, and we provide elite services. We also have options for less elite services for those who can't quite, meet those standards.
Mm-hmm.
We can help in that fashion too, but where I really pride myself is providing that high quality. My company also does ghostwriting. So someone comes to us with a book idea, or maybe they have an outline, or maybe they just have a thought and they need it to come to fruition, and I can help them with any part of that process. And on top of that, I write a ton of my own books.
Wow. So, and I am happy to say that I've worked with you through the editing process for one of my books, Selling with Story. And what I kind of want to start on is you mentioned you love writing and you love editing. And some people see those as the same thing, but you see them as very different things, and it's a very different philosophy. And probably a writer and an editor, they're very different people. Can you explain kind of the difference between those two realms?
I have to use 2 completely different parts of my brain to do those 2 different things. When I'm writing, I'm in a flow. I just put on we'll call it my imagination cap, and just go. And I wear a different hat for editing. The editing side of me is the analytical mind. It's where I get to use my intelligence, discernment, and just be really meticulous and OCD, because I am OCD and I love it. and picking apart things and just really cleaning it up and bringing it to perfection. Whereas the writing side of me is just letting my creativity flow and I'm creating. So it's like the artist versus the thinker, really. And I have both sides to me, and I love creating, but I also love cleaning it up. And I don't edit my own work. I let everything flow, and then it goes to my editing team. I will do a self-edit on it, of course. But because I'm so attached to the work, turning on my editing or putting on my editing cap is a little difficult when I already had the artist cap on for that book. So taking someone else's book where they have the artist cap on, I can put on the editing cap and just go to town, and it's a completely different process. Anyone who's written a book understands the writing and the self-editing are two completely different monsters. And
I find self-editing to be nearly impossible. I go through it too quickly. It's difficult. Some places I'm maybe overcritical, and some places I'm undercritical. It's hard to really have a clear mind or to really be able to look at your own work. I think, at least for me. Maybe it's not the same with everybody, but
no, I think that's accurate with everyone. The thing is, you do have to go over your work at least once or twice before it goes to your editor.
oh yeah.
And I know you did that because I edited your book. So you definitely self-edited somewhat. There's no way you just word vomited it there and sent it to me.
I guess, yeah. Usually my process is I'll try and get as much out as possible, and then I'll try and turn it into something that I think is coherent. And then usually I'll let it sit and ferment for a little while, and I'll come back in with fresh eyes.
Exactly.
For one more. Yeah, I think fresh eyes is very, very crucial to it, and it kind of speaks to the whole process itself, where there's a lot of I don't know, kind of ideas out there about writing a bunch of content really fast or creating a book in a weekend or things like that. But I think a really good process, it takes time.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Although I can write a book in a weekend, no problem. But
Yeah.
then I'm probably going to spend 6 months editing that book to get it
Oh,
to the
there's
point
the
where it's
secret.
readable. And
Okay.
I actually have a process where I take at least 1 to 3 months away from each book I write. As of now, I probably have 70 rough drafts on my computer, no joke, of books I wrote in a flow. And I'm just taking time away from them before I go back in and start the self-editing process. And then it'll go to my editing team.
So you have written many different books. You're working with all kinds of people, both very high-level entrepreneurs to people writing their very first book. And you've seen a lot of different things. A lot of the people listening to this podcast right now either have a book or maybe interested in creating a book as a tool to grow their business, to spread their message. And for that specific type of author, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that they approach you with when I've got this book and it should look like this?
The number one biggest misconception I get is having someone think I'm going to write the book for them. And I will, if they hired me to ghostwrite the book. That's completely different. Most people who come to me have already written their books. So they come with a rough draft, and some people just put together a rough draft of different concepts. It's more like a glorified outline. And then they hand it to me, and they don't realize they have a lot of work to do after the initial round of editing. So developmental editing, if they've bought the premium full blown, we're going to get this to traditional publishing quality, we start with developmental editing. And that's when we look at the big picture issues. Frequently, it will take the author at least a month before they come back to me after making the revisions from the developmental. And that's just the developmental review. Then we go into content editing. But
Can you explain a couple of those steps? Like, what does the developmental review and content editing look like?
So the first step in the process is the developmental review and or developmental editing. There's a difference. The developmental review is more like, I read the book and then I send you a report of here's what I got from the book, usually 1 or 2 pages. Developmental editing is a little more hands-on, so it's a little pricier. I read the whole book, I make notes, then I read the whole book again. And I put comments in the margins and break it down. So maybe you need to explain this concept over here more. And maybe you should consider moving this to the beginning. And so it's rearranging the whole structure of the book. If it's fiction, it's saying maybe you need to completely delete this character or put a love interest here. If it's nonfiction, which most of the books I do are nonfiction, it's saying, hey, these need to be a little more cohesive. Maybe you should put bullet points here, big picture details like that. And then it's, once you have all those comments, it's back to the author. And then the author comes back to me with usually a whole new book after that first round. Then we get into content editing, and content editing is editing, this is somewhat repetitive, editing the content that is already there. That's the difference. Developmental editing is going to fill in holes or move things around, moving the puzzle pieces. Content editing is the content that exists in the book already. So it's very unlikely I will be suggesting you add a new chapter or you move things around. It's going to be me going through the book paragraph by paragraph and making sure it flows, making sure it's consistent, making sure the voice is good, making sure everything's explained to the best extent. And if I say expand on this more, a lot of authors seem to think that I will actually rewrite the paragraph, and that's ghostwriting. It's not editing. It's up to the author to rewrite it, and then I will tweak it accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, kind of bringing this back to the misconceptions, I think a lot of authors out there maybe aren't prepared for this, the developmental editing. Maybe they're just hiring somebody to proofread it, and so I'm sure that could be a stumbling block. But it's actually, I find it to be, it's one of the parts of the process that I really enjoy, that somebody else is having a critical look at your work and can improve it, and really hone in the message.
In all fairness, you were particularly wonderful to work with. So you may say that, but not everyone feels the same way you do. So you were great at taking feedback. You did everything. Yeah, you were a wonderful client.
So what does it look like with a lot of people? What are some of like the challenges they face when facing an editor, and maybe what would some of the advice that you could give them when, like, what can we expect and how can we be prepared to make the most out of our editor?
I think imposter syndrome is the biggest challenge the authors I work with face. They feel inadequate when they come to me, and it can be really disheartening to have an editor just rip apart your baby that you may have spent years working on, or, a weekend. But it's really, you're very vulnerable when you're working with an editor. And I know I'm an author too, so I do work with editors, and every time I will be shaking when I'm waiting on feedback. So just accepting that the editor isn't out to hurt you. The editor is really trying to help you make the best possible product. Hopefully your editor understands that positive feedback is important as well, because you have to give positive feedback, because without it, the author won't know what they are doing right, and they don't know to continue doing those things right. So positive is just as important, and really focus on the positive feedback you get from an editor and run with it. If the editor says you're really good at doing XYZ, do XYZ in all your other books, and maybe even integrate it into public speaking and blog posts, things like that. If you're good at XYZ, do XYZ. When they say we need to improve here, really pay attention to what the editor is doing. And that's the big thing. Don't just go through the track changes and click accept all the way through. Pay attention to what the editor is doing, because that will improve not only your writing, but your message down the road.
Do you have any examples of, I really like the idea of how, if you discover something in somebody's book from an editor, how you can apply it to other areas like social media or speaking. Do you have like a specific case of somebody you've worked with that you could think of?
I know I do. I've worked with a lot of public speakers, and a lot of times we will take their books and then rework them into a keynote. So bird's eye view type thing. A lot of times it's taking that introduction to the book, where it's the personal story, and relating it to their business or their message or whatever it is they're doing. So having someone really help you examine how your personal story can relate to what you're doing can translate into everything. I mean, I worked with someone who helped me really sculpt the beauty of my relationship with my dad over the years to why I'm doing what I do now. And it was actually very eye-opening for me even. So it can be really beneficial, and it's something you can always use. If you notice you have a thing that you do specifically, like emphasizing a certain word, maybe you use a word in a weird way, just weird little quirky things that you can start doing more often, and then you become more memorable.
I love that. And what you're pointing at and hinting at is that there's so much value to having an editor beyond getting rid of the typos, that I think a lot of people don't always notice. But yeah, and being in that state of mind that a lot of people are when they're approaching editors, usually I can imagine, especially for an entrepreneur, they're thinking something like this: okay, I've got this book, I want to get it out published as soon as possible, so let's get the editor done, and let's move forward. But can you tell me, like, as an entrepreneur or somebody who's looking to hire an editor, what should somebody look for when determining? Because again, like, you provided a lot of value in your insights that can spill over into other areas of the business. But I don't think every editor is going to do that, and I don't think every editor is even deserving of looking at a specific piece of work if they don't have the right experience or background. So can you tell us what to look for?
Look for someone who has experience in that background. That's really, unfortunately, this is a tough one because there are so many editors out there, and a lot of them are claiming to be experts in fields that maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You don't have to have a degree to be an editor. You don't have to have training. You can just start editing and market yourself as an editor. That's actually why I specifically only hire people into my company if they have a degree. And that's just my personal preference. There are great editors out there who don't. And maybe they're experts in their fields because they spent so much time reading in that genre, and that can make you an expert. So my suggestion would be, if you're looking for someone and we're just going to say, we're going to say genre specific. You're looking for someone in the genre that you wrote a book in. Talk to the editor, and if they say yes, they're really on point with that genre, ask them what other books they've read in that genre. Talk to them about things in that genre that they would know the answer to if they really were well versed in it. And you can just kind of gauge how knowledgeable they really are just by talking to them.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I think, yeah, with a short conversation, keywords and critical things, like, you can know, like, somebody who knows a lot about golf can have a golf conversation, and if you try to talk to me about the 9-iron or whatever, I won't be able to chat with you very long. And so, yeah, I can see where that advice would be really good. Let's take a little bit of a pivot, and I want to hear from you about how you transformed this. You wrote your first book, made your father proud, but you're not only like a prolific writer and creator, but you've built a whole writing business and editing business. Did you just start out kind of working freelance on these kind of things, and how has this evolved, and what does your company look like now?
Again, a very big question. I started in traditional publishing, so I did sort of have a benefit that a lot of freelance editors don't have. So when I left, I took clients with me, and I had a platform already. I never had to build my business from scratch like most editors have to. I didn't have to start on Fiverr or Reedsy. I had clients, I had a reputation. What I didn't have was enough clients to actually make a living. I never thought freelance editing would make me money. I was a circus performer actually for almost a decade. So I did that with freelance editing on the side, thinking once I left traditional publishing, that was my career. This will only ever be a hobby. But then word started getting out that I came from that background and I was really good. And I started reaching out to other editors who could help me, because in traditional publishing, you have no less than 4 people going over your manuscript. It's usually 5 or 6. So freelance editors trying to do all the editing on a book by themselves, it's just not possible. You cannot provide the same kind of quality. And that's not saying anything bad about the editors. It's just not possible because there's only one person. So I started looking for other people in the industry. and some I even worked with in that industry. And everyone has a different specialization. And so I built a team from there where we each work on one section of the editing, and together we work together like clockwork, and we can provide better quality editing because of that. And so when word started getting out that we had, this team of really high-end editors, word of mouth. I don't even advertise. Everything is word of mouth, and I'm usually booked out pretty far in advance. And for ghostwriting, I'm booked out for a year. So we're well known in the niche because we did good work, and we don't compromise our prices. We don't give discounts. It's not, because then it would compromise the quality. So because we have a good reputation and we really, really worked hard to make sure people were happy with the final product, word traveled, and that kept things moving. So now I own Wandering Words Media, which is, it used to be a little more publishing oriented, but then I realized I don't like the other stuff, and we mostly just stick with editing, and that's our sole focus. So Wandering Words Media is just a premium editing company that can take self-published books and bring them to traditional publishing quality, or we can work with your budget and give you whatever you need.
So what I love about this is that it is a premium service, and you're working with some of the leading minds in author authority, I guess. And in part of that requires, let's see, I've lost my train of thought a little bit. I got lost on author authority. Oh,
it was
dang.
such a fun term.
Yeah. Darn, we can edit this.
I'm gonna shift positions then.
I had like a freaking good question, and now I lost it. This doesn't happen very often. I usually can at least get another question going in a sec, but I'm glad that I'm chatting with you. I feel very comfortable, and like this is no big deal.
And now I'm interested to know what it
was. Oh yeah,
though.
yeah. Here we go. Okay, so you've got a very high-end premium service, and you command really premium prices for a lot of what you do. There's a lot of competitors out there. This is it's an extremely competitive market to work in, where you are competing with everybody. There's the $5 fivers, and you are probably at the very opposite end of the spectrum, where you have a really premium product. And there's a lot of people out there, whether it's in writing, in coaching, in a lot of different aspects of their business, where they face a similar problem, where there's so many cheap, easy options out there. How do you, and I think some of what you do and just the high quality and the word of mouth works for itself, but how do you really command those high prices? And maybe what were, if some of the challenges or obstacles you had to overcome to really, to command your premium prices and your premium position in the marketplace?
Well, it is disheartening for sure. There's a lot of cheap editors out there, but over the years, I've had a lot of clients come to me who used a cheap editor, and then they needed me to fix it. And my reputation started building. And that's when I realized I'm not going to compromise my prices for anyone. I used to give discounts, and those clients have always been the biggest nightmares. So for every client I was wasting this time on trying to work with them for their budget and just really, charge them a lot less, I was wasting my time when I could have been really dedicating that time to someone who was comfortable paying me what I am worth. With the amount of training I have and the amount of training my team has, we can command a higher price because we offer a better product, and people who understand that will pay for that. And that doesn't mean we can't work for less. Usually what that means is the author has to do a lot more work. So the people who pay my premium prices are usually the set it and forget it types. They want me to do everything, and I'm happy to. But if you're going to pay me a lot less, that's fine. It just means the author themselves has to really step up to the plate and do a lot of work. And if the author is willing to do that, I'm happy to work with them. So there's a balance. I mean, I'm certainly not going to go take on $5 jobs. And honestly, those people doing that are probably really going to leave you very disappointed. There are exceptions. There are editors just starting out wanting to build up a good reputation. Chances are they don't have really good training though if they're starting out there, because most of the high quality editors have a degree in this, and they can usually move right into a job straight out of college. Once you have a master's degree, you are a lot higher in demand. And I think that's why I sort of sit where I am on the food chain of freelance editors, because I did come from where I did, and I have the credentials to show for it, whereas not everyone does. So when I compete, I'm confident that I am providing a premium product, and I'm not sheepish about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And though I think your credentials in your case being educational, and I think that that's phenomenal. And I think it's a rare thing that a lot of people actually do get to have their college education back them up properly. So props to you on that.
Oh,
But
I
I think
also have
there's,
an art degree.
oh, okay. Well then,
I have
well
that
then you
too.
know how the rest of us feel too. Um, but yeah, I think there's lots of ways that people can really understand their experience and where they're coming from and what makes them unique if they want to command premium prices. But it is all about that confidence in yourself and who you are and where you come from, that brings that forward and translates into better prices for you, better results for your client, and a higher commitment level.
Exactly.
So, Kat, we've explored a lot about everything from kind of the editing business to what goes into editing a great book. And I'm just wondering if you have any closing words out there for some of these entrepreneurs, a lot of these people that you're working with. Maybe what is it about an author? There's some qualities or something in an author that you're working with that you feel like will make them stand out or put them ahead of the batch in their work.
The drive to improve. Number one thing that sets those clients apart. An entrepreneur with the drive to improve is going to get light years ahead of the entrepreneur who thinks he or she already has everything figured out. And I run into a lot of that when it comes to editing and ghostwriting. They think they have everything figured out, but when you come to me for editing, you're in my world. So please understand that I understand grammar probably better than you do. However, the author is the expert in their topics. So I respect the author's expertise and the author respects mine. And when we can have that mutual understanding, everything goes so much smoother. And I notice that they tend to really do well in their businesses, because if they're respecting me that way, I know they're respecting their clients, their colleagues, everything. So accepting feedback and always being willing to improve. And I think that's been very beneficial for me as well, because I've gotten some pretty harsh feedback and over the years it's I've cried, but it's been a journey, and I'm better because of it. And I think that's true with any entrepreneur.
Oh, I mean, me too. I think the reason I'm able to take feedback the way that you complimented me on earlier is through working with a startup and having kind of a very, somebody who really, really cared a lot about their content, looking over everything and being very critical and challenging me all the time. And it was pretty difficult and heartbreaking at first, for sure. But yeah, it was such a valuable and powerful lesson. And I think, it'll help you much beyond just writing a good book, but it translates into all areas of business. So I think that's an amazing insight. Kat, where can we go to connect with you to learn more about you and learn more about editing?
wanderingwordsmedia.com. That's my website. It has pretty much everything you need to know without just emailing me directly. And my contact info is on there too.
Awesome. Kat, thank you so much for joining us.
Indeed. Thank you for having me.